painting friends, welcome back. My name is Stoof. You guys have made it to part 3 of 3 for the cheetah painting here. So we already did the sky and the grasses, now we're focusing on the cheetah, and this cheetah gave me some troubles, I am not gonna lie. I thought that because I was using an 18 by 24 canvas that was going to make things a little bit easier, because I thought a smaller canvas would make all of the spots much more difficult to paint. But I think that I still made it difficult for myself somehow with this larger canvas. So I am going to do my best to let you know my mistakes and make it so that you don't have to make those mistakes when you're recreating this painting. I did a lot of layering, and that made the finished product look great with the texture of the fur and the little details in the face there, but I don't think that it needs to take as long as I made it take to create this cheetah. So I'm going to do the best I can to give you guys the most straightforward approach to recreating this cheetah's body here, using acrylic paint on canvas. If you guys have been here since part 1, then thanks for coming back. I hope you guys are having fun painting this one, and let's get started with part 3.
Alright, so we're going to focus on the cheetah in this video. If you want to learn about the sky or the grass and how to paint those, then click my description below this video and you can watch part 1 or part 2. But to get started with the cheetah, we used the grid method, so I placed a grid on the canvas and I have a grid on my reference photograph. But for you guys, I recommend you screenshot my finished painting at the end of this video, and you could create your own grid on that and use that for reference. I was referencing more than one cheetah body and face, so that's why this was so difficult for me. If I was just referencing a single cheetah's figure, then I would have had everything accurate with my first sketch, and I wouldn't have gotten caught up with layering and readjusting features on the body and face. So to make it easier for you guys, you can just screenshot the finished painting, make your own grid of that, and then use that for reference, or I can already do that for you, and I did. It's on my Patreon page. If you want to go there, my patrons are able to get the grid for the completed painting, so they have a nice easy cheetah to follow exactly when putting their grid down and sketching out the cheetah. So once I sketched out the cheetah, I then start to put in a base color of paint for the cheetah. And when you're painting this base layer, we're going to use a few different shades, but you just want to pretend that those spots are not there. You want to look at the basic highlights and shadows and color values and tones in the cheetah's body without the spots. So the top of the back has more purple in it. The middle part of the rib cage going towards the back, right above the hip, is the biggest highlight, where we see more light on there, and we have more of a deep shadow on the inner parts of the legs. The legs that are behind the leg in the foreground are going to be in shadow. So we want to just basically get, for each section of the body, a base color, and then you want to have a soft transition into that color. So you don't want to have any like solid blocks of brown and then a solid block of yellow. Like, you want to have a smooth transition into the other tone that you're making your way towards. So work in sections, because we're using acrylic paint. It's going to dry quickly, and once you get one section done, move to the next section, start to get that color in there, and then blend it with a nice smooth transition. Alright, now let's just review these sections of the cheetah and what colors I used to get each little base layer for each section of the cheetah's body. So the back, where we have that angle coming down at like a 20-degree angle from the butt area over to the back of the neck, is where it's more purple. That is going to be magenta mixed with burnt sienna, maybe a hint of burnt umber, a hint of cadmium yellow medium, just a hint, and some white to cool it, to like make that color less saturated. And then as we move down, we drop the magenta, so now we're focusing more on the burnt umber to make that less vibrant. We still have burnt umber, white, maybe a bit of yellow Hansa or some bronze yellow in there too, maybe a hint of our cadmium yellow medium, just to get that highlight color, but you want to have more white in that section so it's a little bit brighter. And then as we move down again, we get a bit of a deeper shadow that just has more burnt umber, bronze yellow, white, and maybe a hint of magenta in there again, but bronze yellow and burnt umber are probably more dominant in that section. And then as we move further down, we're getting closer to the belly. We have more of our yellow Hansa, cadmium yellow medium, and burnt umber, a hint of white in there as well. And then moving farthest down, we see the section where the tummy meets the grass right below it, and then that kind of follows the tummy line up to like the hip, and that section has a little bit more magenta in it again, and burnt umber, white, maybe like a hint of burnt sienna, hint of black maybe too, since it's a little bit less saturated and a little bit darker. And then moving over to the back hind leg that is in the background, for that I just used magenta, burnt sienna, and burnt umber for the base color. And then moving to the leg closest to the foreground, the hind leg, we have a section that has a little bit more burnt umber and white and cadmium yellow medium. And then we have a highlight section that has white, bronze yellow, maybe a hint of yellow Hansa and a hint of magenta, hint of umber, but that's much lighter than the section of leg that's closer to the front of the cheetah. And then for the tail, the underside of the tail, so the bottom part of that U is going to have more burnt umber in it and burnt sienna, maybe a hint of magenta, and the upper part of the tail is going to have more white, yellow Hansa, and maybe like a hint of umber, hint of burnt sienna. So you guys are kind of starting to catch my my method here to understand what color value mixtures I'm using to create the base layers for these different sections of the cheetah. So once I got these main color sections down, I then started to add the stripes on the back of the tail. Let me quickly go to the face real quick. So for the face is a little bit cooler because it's farther away from the sun and it's facing the viewer. It's a little bit more in shadow, so use a little bit more magenta and burnt umber when you're mixing your base color for the face. Alright, but coming back to the tail. So I started with the tail because I thought that starting with the back side of the cheetah with the stripes on the tail and that kind of like form into spots would be the best way to go, because the spots on the front of the cheetah are a little bit smaller and a little bit less patterned, and the stripes on the tail, which lead to the spots on the back of the cheetah, do kind of have a bit of a pattern. At least they kind of form diagonals, the spots, so that makes it a little bit easier to get started. And then it's just kind of like try to keep even spacing and even sizing with your spots and carry that over to the front of the cheetah, maybe getting your spots a little bit smaller as you get closer to the front part of the cheetah's body. For the layer of these stripes, I just mixed burnt umber with my black and maybe a hint of magenta in there too, just to warm it up a bit. And I do add more pure black right on top of this, but I started out with that middle tone to get started, just to make sure I was putting my stripes in the right spot. Once I put down the darker portion of the stripes, then I wanted to go in and add a highlight for the part that was not dark in the stripes, the whiter part of the stripes. So I mixed a little magenta with some Hansa yellow and white, maybe a hint of umber too, and I just put that color in between all the stripes, covering the whole tail. And then as you can see, the fur is a little bit longer at the back part of the tail, so I'm making those jagged little brush strokes to show that little black sections and little white sections of fur are kind of peeking through, and we don't have a perfect solid line for the stripes. They have kind of jaggedy edges because the hair's longer back there. So once I added that highlight, then I went back and I added a little bit of bronze yellow and burnt umber on the underside of the tail to get more of a shadow. The right side of the U in the tail has a little bit warmer yellows in it because the light is from that sun behind it is kind of starting to reach that back side of the tail. So I incorporated a little bit more yellow in there, moving up to the top on the back upper part of the body there. Then I just kind of started to build up that base layer again, building a little bit more contrast in the shadow where the hip meets the rest of the body, and just tried to blend that in, adding a little bit more burnt sienna to the top part of the cheetah's back and covering up my grasses where I painted earlier. The grasses overlapped the cheetah, so now I'm just reforming the cheetah's body with another round of highlight on the top part of the back where we have a little bit more magenta with our burnt sienna. And then as you can see, I'm holding the brush at an angle there, going back and forth so that it gets the shape of the body with our highlights are forming into shadows following the shape of the body. Now I'm boosting the highlight on the back of the hind leg there. Just touching up the tail a bit, boosting that shadow on the underside of the tail, and then boosting that highlight one more time on the right side of the inner part of the tail. And now I'm going back and adding another round of shadows, just using pure black for this one, making this back and forth brush strokes to get the jagged, furry look there. And the way you just saw me do this layering for the tail is the same process for the rest of the cheetah's body. So I did a round of shadows or added the spots first, then I added a round of highlights for the spaces in between the spots or stripes, and then you go back and you darken or adjust the shape of the stripes again, and then we do another final round of highlights, just touching up a couple little highlights as well. Here I'm just refining the shape of the cheetah again. From putting that grass down earlier, we started to cover up a little bit of the tummy, and I think I made the cheetah a little bit too thick. So I just cleaned up that shadow section on the underside of the belly to make his tummy come up a bit more, make him a little bit thinner, and then now I'm adding a bit of a highlight to the leg that's in the background in shadow. I just added some naphtha red in there to warm up that shadow, and then I added a bit of bronze yellow with cadmium yellow medium and burnt umber and burnt sienna for that little bit of a highlight at the right side of that back hind leg there. Now I'm taking a little more yellow Hansa, maybe a hint of cadmium yellow medium with white, maybe a hint of bronze yellow too. So not super saturated, but a nice bright highlight here. And the fur on the stomach, at the lowest point of the stomach there, is looser, longer fur. So I'm trying to get that appearance with my brush strokes here, just kind of swiftly dragging the brush down and kind of picking up the brush as I'm dragging those little curves down to make it look like he has some longer tufts of fur on his tummy. I pull that highlight color up and I try to get it to blend in more. And as you can see, I'm doing a lot of reworking with my layering here on the base layer of paint. So if you guys didn't make your base layer of paint perfectly match what mine looked like, then you're totally fine, because I do a lot of reworking with the colors just before I put those spots down, just to make sure everything under the spots is going to look good, because once you put the spots down, you're only going to be able to work in between the spots, and it gets a little bit more difficult to make a nice transition of color when you're just working in between the spots and you can't really, you could paint over them, but then you're going to have to redo the spots. Once I was happy with the way that I readjusted the base layers of paint colors, then I went in and started to add my spots. So if you guys are using the grid method, the spots shouldn't be too difficult for you as long as you put a lot of grids down. Then you'll have each little square to look at and reference where your spots go in that square, and you'll eventually build up all the spots on the cheetah. The spots, as you can see, are not all the same shape. They are also not all the same size. Some spots are smaller, they kind of fit in the little spaces. Other spots are larger. They're not all evenly spaced. So it is very not non-patternized, I guess you could say. But if you look, the spots, so it doesn't really seem to form any particular pattern with respects to, like, okay, every fourth big circle gets a small circle for a spot or anything like that. But it does start to form some lines and diagonals, as you can see here. We get like a diagonal pattern going across the body with the way that these spots are carried out. So if you can find a pattern, that's a good way to go as well. But the grid method is definitely the easiest way to get these spots down. And when you guys are putting your spots down, think about how large that spot is and how much space it's taking up. As you can see, my spots closer to the front of the cheetah in general are smaller than the spots on the back end of the cheetah. So think about that too when you're working on your spots, just to make sure that it's looking realistic. And I basically just used the same color for the spots just to get started. We are going to go back with more layering where we start to build up a little bit more shadows on some of the spots and make some of the spots a little bit warmer on the highlighted sections of the body. But for now, I just wanted to get a good coverage of the spots. And as you can see on the cheetah's body, it already starts to look more realistic now that those spots are there. The fur just looks really short. It almost looks like a jaguar instead of a cheetah because the fur looks so smooth. So we are going to go back later and fuzz up the fur a bit to get a little bit more of a textured cheetah hair look, or cheetah fur look. Once I got that base layer of spots down on the back section coming up to the chest, I started to work on the face, and I had a lot of trouble with the face of the cheetah because I was referencing a few different cheetahs' faces. Some cheetahs had their mouths open, some cheetahs had their mouths closed, some had their ears tucked back, some of them had their ears tipped up, and I wasn't quite sure how I wanted this cheetah to look yet. I wasn't sure what was going to look the best in this painting. So I started out with the ears kind of tucked down to the side, but the way that I finished the painting was with the ears facing forward. You can see there's some green paint in my hair. I'm just noticing it took me like a good 2 weeks to get that out. I think that's oil paint from a painting I finished a few days before this one. So I don't want you guys to pay too close attention to the shapes that I'm putting in the face right now, because I do adjust those later, especially the ears and the lines that I put on the face. But I do want you to look at the colors that I'm using, because I'm building up the highlights and the shadows we see on the face, and those colors do not change too much. So again, if you are following your grid method, then just go by what you see in this finished painting and place the eyes, nose, and mouth in those correct spots, I kind of played around with the placement of the eyes. At first I thought that I made the nose a little too big, then I realized I made the eyes down too low or too high or something like that. So I kept readjusting where the eyes and nose were on the face. So you guys don't have to worry about that if you just go with the grid method. Just put them right where you see them on the grid. For the highlights on the face, I use white with just a hint of burnt umber for right under the eye on the left side of the face. Carried that down, added a bit of yellow Hansa with some umber and white for the section on under the left side of the nose, and then we used cadmium yellow medium with white, maybe a hint of burnt sienna for this nice warm golden yellow part of the face on above the nose and going over the left side of the eye. And then I tried to get a smoother transition of that into the highlight on the left side of the face. And I did make this face a little bit too chubby at first too, as I was referencing a couple different cheetahs, so we fixed that problem as well. If you guys use the grid method, you don't have to worry about that either. For the top part of the cheetah's head, there's some light catching the top of the head, so we have a highlight there. That's some cadmium yellow medium with white, maybe a hint of magenta or burnt sienna, just to warm it up. And we just carry that basically along the whole top part of the head. And then we have kind of a shadow on the top of the head has a highlight that like fades into a shadow on the right side of the face. And then we have some stripes and spots on the top of the head. For the first cheetah that I was referencing, it had a different pattern than the second cheetah that I looked at. So cheetahs' stripes and spots on their heads are different, so, and I guess the spots on their bodies are too. So they all have like 3 main stripes that go from the center of the nose area to in between the eyes to the top of the head, and then one over the left eye, one over the right eye, and then they have a bunch of little spots in between there. So I started off using warmer colors for those just to get them sketched out, and then I end up going back with more layering and making them darker. And we have a nice bright highlight right under the mouth on the chin, and then that highlight kind of carries down onto the chest a bit, and we separate that with a shadow between the chin and the chest. And then we have these nice black wavy lines that kind of frame the nose on the cheetah, and those come down from the inner part of the eye. They go straight down, then they loop out and away from the nose and come down to the mouth, where there's like the black gum section of the mouth that they connect to. And they also have like a dark rim around their eyes as well. And you want to just think about how thick you're making these lines. You don't want to make them too thick, but you also don't want to make them too thin. So just if you're having trouble, just get the whole face blocked in and then try to pinpoint what might be off, because I was referencing a few different cheetahs' faces and merging ideas together. Something definitely seemed off with mine for a while, and I kept making adjustments. But if you get all of the general facial features in, once that's down, then you can go back and start to make adjustments. And since we're using acrylic paint, it's not very difficult to make adjustments. So here I'm just starting to add all of the shadows for the stripes and the spots on the face. Starting to get that furry texture by making up and down brush strokes using a finer flat-tipped brush. Adding a bit of a highlight around the rim of the eyes. Little highlight for the eyebrows. And that up and down brush stroke is really making it look like we have that furry texture. You don't want to have a smooth texture on the face because you can see the fur or hair on the cheetah. Now I'm carrying that highlight over to the left side of the face, into the body, and then down onto the chest, including more magenta mixed with burnt sienna there for like a shadowy white fur. And then I let that section dry for a bit and I moved back to the hind leg in the background and I started to add some spots on that one. I just used black with a little bit of burnt umber for that, and I'm just placing those spots the way that I see them on my cheetah in my reference photo. At this point, I'm just troubleshooting what was off on the face here, so I tried lifting the eyes up a bit higher and readjusting those black lines around the nose. And I do think that lengthening the snout by pulling the eyes up higher and making them a little bit smaller made this look more like a cheetah's face than a jaguar's face, so we're headed in the right direction. Next, I added another shadow there to separate the chin from the chest, and I realized that I made the shoulder come out too far, and it was a little too bulky looking on the right side of the cheetah, so I cleaned up the right side there and added some more grass to cover up my mistake. Next, I started to work back in the face again, re-establishing those highlights and shadows. So on the left side of the nose, everything's more on highlight, and on the right side of the nose, things are more in shadow. So we have more ultramarine blue, burnt umber, maybe some magenta too on the right side, and then on the left side we have more Hansa yellow and white, maybe burnt sienna. I added those two teeth. I decided to have the cheetah's mouth open slightly so that we can see his sharp teeth there. And now I'm continuing to adjust the base layer for the shadows on the chest of the cheetah where it goes down to its two front legs. And here I continued adjusting the right border of the cheetah. I didn't want to make him too bulky, so I touched up where the grass is there. I also thinned down his face quite a bit, which I'll touch up later. So as you can see, I definitely had a trial and error process with this, and that was just because I used multiple reference photos. You guys should not run into this many problems with the shape of the body needing to be readjusted and different features on the face to be readjusted, as long as you follow the grid method, or if you're very good at eyeballing proportions. And if you do make a mistake, then you can follow the same route that I did, where you just keep making these minor adjustments until you feel that it's starting to look realistic and kind of come more to life. Now I was pretty happy with the base layer for the front part of the cheetah, and I started to add more of our spots, and I was mixing my burnt umber with black here. Some sections have a little more burnt umber than black, and you can see my spots aren't quite as smooth in the very front of the cheetah, like right under the face on the chest part. They're more jaggedy, kind of like the tail, because the fur's longer there, so we have a little bit less of a perfect smooth circle look there, and then the hair is shorter on the middle part of the body and on the arms and legs, so those circles get a little bit more well defined. Then I realized that the underside of the chest needed to be white, and that helps separate the chest from the back front leg, or like the front leg in the background. So that helped a lot with bringing this cheetah back to life by adding that magenta with a little bit ultramarine blue and white for the underside of the chest at the front of the cheetah, and then keeping that burnt sienna color for the front leg that's in the background. Now I'm going back to the face again and adjusting the shape of the ears. making the ears look like they're facing the viewer and listening to what they're looking at. Here I did another round of reworking the face and adjusting the thickness of my lines and shadows and stripes and spots. But as you can see, the base colors that I had in my first round of putting color down for the face is pretty much the same as what I have here. So even though the features kept getting adjusted and I keep rearranging the spots and the features on the face, the colors are still staying the same. So if you got your colors down right the first time and you just referenced my main photo, then you shouldn't have to worry too much about that mistake I just made there. Again, I'm boosting the highlights and shadows on the face, making up and down brush strokes to get that textured fur look. And I continued that fur texture down onto the chest, making the hairs a little bit longer, using a fine flat tipped brush here, and going in with a couple little shadows for some pieces of fur that are in shadow. You kind of want to build up highlight and shadow with these fur pieces too. So here I'm putting that highlight down, trying not to go over the spots too much, but then going back and putting another round of dark over the spots and keeping that texture with the lines so it looks nice and longer fur. Now I'm further refining the shape of these ears again on the face, adding a couple more little highlights right in front of the ear and around the left ear. The fur is not as long on the top of the head, so I'm making smaller little brush strokes here, adding a little bit more of a highlight over the eye and on the forehead, darkening up some of those stripes on the head. And the ears are more white with like darker fur on the inside, so we have it's the same as the left and right side of the nostril for the ears though. The left ear had more white and yellow, and the right ear has more magenta, ultramarine blue, and burnt umber in it, mixed with white. Alright, so now we're further adjusting the highlights, and this is what I was talking about earlier, where it's really tough to adjust your base layer of paint once you already put those spots down. So you saw me just reworking around all those spots there and boosting that highlight again. Now we're bringing it back to the eyes. So let's focus on the eyes for a bit here. Once you get the shape of the eyes, the inside of the eye has burnt umber in it, burnt sienna in it. The eyes are like really like a golden, warm brown color. And since they're kind of more in shadow here, I cooled them down a bit. And then at the base of the eye, right above that black line, at the bottom part of the eye, we are going to put a highlight there with burnt sienna and cadmium yellow, and see how that just like brings those eyes to life. That gives us that look of like a three-dimensional eye, and then we keep the black pupil at the top. It touches the top black line of the eye, and be wise about the shape of your eye too. Make sure it kind of has that flat top edge and then a curve at the bottom part of the eye. We also add a little highlight right under the eye too to further make that stand out. Alright, I'm going back again and reworking the colors in between the spots, and this is another step that you don't need to do too much of. If you want to brighten up things, you can do it a little bit, but I think this step was a bit unnecessary. I kind of overdid that highlight a little bit, and I redo the highlight again on the upper part of the cheetah, and as you can see, I'm covering up all these spots, but this is helping me to achieve that textured look. So I am making those back and forth little brush strokes with my spots when I put the spots back down, and that makes it look like we do have some hair here now. It's not just like a smooth body. There is some fur or hair there. And you could achieve this more quickly by just adjusting right around each spot. Just take your spot and make those back and forth brush strokes in each little spot to give it that look of texture. So here I'm going back after I readjusted all of the highlights and re-put the spots down. Now I'm going back and I'm taking a small fine brush and I'm adding some bristles of hair onto the cheetah's body. So you can see I'm just taking that little brush and just adding a couple lines here and there, just little highlights in between the spots, on the spots, kind of overlapping the spots to make them look more like it's on fur and not just a smooth surface. Another thing, when you're putting your spots on the very top part of the cheetah where the back is starting to face away from us and then like roll over because it's a three-dimensional body, as you can see there, the spots aren't quite as circular. They're more of an ellipse or even like a straight line. So as the spots are going on top of the cheetah, the angle that we're viewing them at gets more flattened. So your spots at the top of the cheetah are going to be more flat. Alright guys, so I tried my best here to explain this one to you. I know this was a tough one, and the way that I did it wasn't the easiest either because I kept readjusting things, but I'm gonna stick to what I said in the beginning, where if you just screenshot the end of this, or if you're a patron, go on my Patreon and get your own grid for this painting. Just put your grid down on your canvas. This was an 18 by 24 inch canvas, so you could use that same size or something with other dimensions. Just adjust your ratio for your painting. Then you'll be good to go. I did try my best to give you guys the right colors that I used and tips for painting the spots on the cheetah. Just a quick review of what we did here. We basically got that base layer of paint down for the cheetah, and then we start to add the spots and the stripes on the cheetah. Then we add a highlight for the fur in between the stripes or spots, and then we go back again, adding more texture to the stripes and spots with those back and forth brush strokes, darkening the stripes or spots a bit more, and then another round of highlight on top of that just to get like the really textured look of the fur. And we work in sections since it's acrylic paint. Like I started with a tail, then started to make my way up to the front of the cheetah, working in sections. And then for the face, you're going to put your base layer of paint down. The left side of the face is going to be more in highlight. The right side of the face is going to be more in shadow. And we get the base layer paint down, add those stripes and spots, get the eyes in the right spot. Then same thing, keep layering with your highlights and your shadows until you're happy with the finished result. Alright guys, if you stuck around since part 1 and you fully recreated this painting, I'd love to see it. You can post it on your own Instagram page and just tag me, the painting Stoof, so I can see it on Instagram. Or if you put it on my Facebook page is the painting Stoof. Really looking forward to seeing your work. I hope you guys enjoyed this 3-part series. Have a great day and happy painting. Bye bye.